Hey folks, John here, Old Hickory Forge. Welcome back for part 2 of the Viking sword build. So before I do the rough grind, I want to go ahead and get the fittings, the guard, the pommel made, the handle block roughed out and all that, just it's less work later on down the line. So first thing we got to do, obviously, tang's thicker than the sword, so we got to thin this down, make it perfectly flat, dress up these tang shoulders, and then we'll go ahead and get the guard made. To make the guard, what I've got here is a piece of 3/4 inch square mild steel, cut off at 4.5 inches. I'm going to taper both ends, slot punch it, and then fit it to the tang of the sword. But anyway, let's get started. Alright, I got the tang roughed in and tapered. It needs to be both the thickest and the widest up here at the shoulder. It tapers real nice, so that way you can fit a guard good. But anyway, now it's time to go ahead and fix up these shoulders to be fitted to the guard. I actually don't want these square. I want them slightly tapered down because I want to fit a curved guard on this. So I'm just going to file kind of at an angle. So there we go. Didn't take much work at all. They don't have to be as perfect as they do on a knife, but they still need to be pretty much even. Because when you fit them to the guard, they'll be recessed into the guard ever so slightly. So, you know, any discrepancies will disappear, but you still want to make it as tight as you can. So, I've got the piece for my guard. I've gone ahead and center punched it in the center. Now I'm going to take a tool called the slot punch. It's like a chisel, but just blunt on the end. Find that center mark. Alright, punch from the other side now. Getting pretty deep in there. Should be punching a plug out any second now. Can of beeswax here to help keep the punch from getting stuck. There you go. We got a nice clean slot. That's about 1,000,000 times faster than drilling holes and filing them all out. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of gently forge out a taper. I don't want a very extreme or aggressive taper. I just kind of want it to be there. I feel like it'll look good. I feel like that looks pretty good, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit the other side now. So I've got the tapers on the guard forged out where I like them. All I'm going to do now is basically stick the guard on there, take a piece of square tubing, and then just basically drift it onto the tang to get a good fit. I actually bottomed out my piece of square tubing, which is something I didn't think about. So what I'm going to do now is post up over here on the swage block. I basically just slam the sword into it to drift it on there where it needs to go. I've got the guard pretty much where it needs to go. So what I'm going to do now is just switch to a wider hole on the swage block. This one should do it. And what that's going to do is kind of help create that curve that I'm looking for in the guard, as well as recess the shoulders of the tang into the guard like I was talking about. So I'm sure that's not the right way to fit a guard, but it's fitted. But up's looking pretty good and it's on there, so worked for me. Same process for the lower hilt as we did with the upper hilt. We're just going to slot punch it. And once we got our slot, we'll go ahead and taper out both ends just like we did with the guard. But now, just like we did with the upper guard, we're just going to drift it onto the tang of the sword. I've got a mark where it needs to go right there, so just going to work my way down to it. So, to make the pommel, what I've done is I've started with a piece of round stock and I'm just slowly kind of working it in to bring it to kind of a rectangle. And then I'll stretch it out this way some to get it to mate up with the thickness of the lower guard, or lower hilt, or I think the term is hilt is what it's supposed to be called. Kind of the overall shape I'm looking for, and I'll just go into the face of the anvil. Trying to spread it out to get it to the width and roughly the same thickness as the lower guard. So, I actually didn't slot punch my pommel. I drilled 2 holes because I was worried about being able to get a straight hole. But I still need to open it up and clean it up with the slot punch, so that's what I'm doing now. Alright, now I need to go ahead and bend the pommel and do a curve that somewhat matches the lower guard, so I'm going to use a half round swage on my swage block. Then once we got a curve that matches pretty closely, we'll go ahead and force it onto the tang of the sword just like we did all the other fittings. So all the fittings are fitted to the tang of the sword. Next thing we got to do is trim off the excess material here and here, and get all these cleaned up and ready for the engraving. So, I've never actually engraved anything before in my life, but I want to put some runes on each side of the guard. So the best option, it seems like to me, is just a Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel, and then I'll probably go over it with a carbide burr. Like I said, I've never done this before, so I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go. I'm going to run the Dremel at kind of a slow speed. Alright, so now I've got a carbide burr on here. It's basically just a little tiny sharp carbide ball on the end here. I'm just going to follow the line I just made real careful. I feel like that'll make it a little more bold. Seems to be working. So, like I said, I've never engraved anything before, so if somebody knows a whole lot about engraving and I did something terribly wrong, say something in the comments. But I got the rune for love on one side of the guard, and I got the rune for strength on the other side. So next thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and throw all these fittings back in the fire, let them come up to cherry red or so, and then let them cool on their own and get a nice black oxide finish on them. And then I won't touch them again until the final fit up. So as you can see, we got the nice black oxide finish on the guard. Dremel tool actually worked pretty good for getting the runes in. The decorative lines were just cutting with an angle grinder. But anyway, let's get to grinding this baby. So, I've decided to go ahead and burn in the handle block while I'm at it before I do the rough grind. So what I've got here is a block of maple. I'm using maple because it's a really tough, really strong hardwood, because I have a lot of it laying around and because I don't much care for it on knife handles. I just don't like the way it looks. And something like this where it's going to be covered up is perfect for it. So, got two holes close together drilled in the top, one hole drilled in the bottom. I've got the tang of the sword and the forge heating up. And then we'll just stick the sword in the vise and push this baby on here. So, nothing to it really. Just chuck the sword up in the vise, push a block onto it. Might take you a few heats, but you'll get there. Once you're actually through to the other end of your block, it moves a good bit quicker. See? So, handle's roughed out, but as you can see, where it fits the hilt and the hilt, if that's the correct term, there's space on the sides because these are curved and this is flat. So what we need to do now is very gently and very slowly contour these edges until it all fits up nice and tight. It's also smaller than I would normally want a sword handle because, like I said, this is going to be wrapped in leather. So that's what's happening now. So there you go, we got a nice fit. You know, that's a really minor step, but it's really important to the fit and finish of the overall sword, so can't skip it. So, now it's time for the rough grind of the sword itself. The first part that's got to be done is this fuller right here. The fuller is to make the blade lighter and stronger. Some people say it's to catch blood or something like that, but it's just to make the blade lighter and stronger. In the old days, using fullers, you could actually forge out a blade with way less material, but that's got to be done first, because as you grind in your bevels, your fuller will get narrower towards the tip of the sword, and if you try to get back in there after your bevels are ground, you're going to screw your lines all up. So the fuller has to be completely done before you touch the bevels. Now this fuller, like I said in the beginning, it's not really wide enough. It's wide enough for like a medieval style sword, but Viking swords had much wider fullers. That one was done on a 2-inch contact wheel, so right now I've got an 8-inch contact wheel on here. So I'm just going to strike in the fuller, rough it in, and then take it all the way up to about 220 grit or so before I strike in the bevels. I'm also just going to true up the outer profile of the sword. So let's get started. So we got a random thunderstorm. It's just Thor beating his anvil. They approve. Anyway, back to work. So, there's the fuller. Got it ground in. Took it up to 220 on both sides. That's as far as I'm going to go because I'll be able to get a nice satin finish with that. So, next thing we're going to do is work on the bevels. true up the profile and start creating the distal taper a little better. It's still a little thick at the tip, a little meat needs to be removed, but it's shaping up real nice. It's feeling good. It's already lighter than my last sword, so let's get to work. Well, I'll be darned if that ain't starting to look like a sword. The edge is still very thick. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm leaving it thick to hopefully avoid any problems going into the heat treat, so the sword is still much heavier than it's going to be, and that's why there's still some marks on the bevels. But it's coming along. Got my rune for strength on one side of the guard, got my rune for love on the other. Cool little decorations on the pommel. This is why I don't like maple. You touch it with your dirty hands and it gets dirty and soaks in there and you can't sand it out, and it's just, it doesn't look good on knives, but for something like this where it's going to be covered in leather, it'll work just fine. So, anyway, there's that. Next video will hopefully be the heat treat, temper, and final assembly. So, thanks for watching. Stick around.